Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this IDEA Diversity Lunch. I'm very happy that you are here already in such a big number. I would like to remind you that we are going to use our IAF app again, where you will this time be able to ask questions. So not answer to our questions, but ask your questions. You remember the procedure how to do that. Download the app, go into Spring Meetings, ask a question, and the event code is IDEA, just for your memory. And now, for the moderation, again, I would like to ask our Vice President for Diversity Initiatives, Mrs. Mary Snitch, to lead you through this program and introduce our speaker. Mary, of course.
Thank you, everyone. I want to, in the spirit of full disclosure, I want to let you know that we're starting just a very few minutes late today because for the last 2+ hours, I've been chairing the selection committee for the 2018 Excellence in 3G Diversity Award. And the reason that we were in there for over 2 hours, we actually could have been in there for the rest of the day, because we are so thrilled and so gratified, and hope that President Legal will be as well, that there are so many organizations doing such great work to advance diversity, to build diversity at all levels into their business operations, their business strategies, that it's hard to choose. But it's very apparent in our industry, and it's just very exciting. And so that's where I've been. That's where several of us have been. We have the very great pleasure of welcoming Allyson Zimmermann, who is the Executive Director of Catalyst Europe. She is based in Zurich, Switzerland, and she is going to be our luncheon speaker for today and talk to us about another important area of diversity. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I want to say before we start, food is priority, so please, if you do sit down, get up and get more food. I do not take it as an interruption if you're walking back and forth. I came at breakfast and was terrified to run across and grab a croissant because everybody was stationed. So please feel free to move. I'm curious how many people have heard of Catalyst. No worries if you haven't. Anybody? Okay. I will give a brief. Okay, there's somebody in the back. Just a brief overview about Catalyst. And before I start, just a reminder, this is going to be interactive before I go into Catalyst. If you haven't downloaded it, please do so, because it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. I'm going to ask you questions, and I really want you to participate on the Slido side. Okay, so Catalyst is a research and advisory organization. We started in 1962, and it started by a woman in New York City, and it was really focused on bringing more women into the workplace. But as we looked farther, and for many years have been working at this, we realized there are some key barriers that are really blocking women from going up to the upper echelons. And so today I'm going to highlight, I'm going to ask you some questions, test some myths and perceptions about women. But this isn't only about women. Today I'm talking about sponsorship. This is also, think of different race, nationality, think about age, generation. So while I'll reference gender a few times, please bring forward examples. And at the end, we'll take questions. I'm hesitant to take questions during because I want to quiz you and I want to make sure that I don't reveal the answer. But definitely post the questions. Whoops. and we'll go forward. One more thing about Catalyst is we do not make blanket statements about women in the workforce, such as if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman sisters, they would still be here. We actually do not see that. We find that very simplistic, and so everything that we look through is really rooted in research. We also have learned a lot by working with over 800 multinational corporations. I've met several in the room who are members of Catalyst. So go into the next. Just really brief about one study that I'll be tapping in today when we talk about the sponsorship effect. It's a global study that we've done. We've been tracking 10,000 MBAs across the globe. 39% of them originally came from the STEM field. Many have left STEM completely, primarily women, of this 10,000 that we've been tracking. And so when we really wanted to find out what are the myths about women, what is kind of running the show of perceptions about women, and are they true? And I'll reveal today a couple of them, but maybe when we get into the Q&A, we'll share more. Okay. So while you're eating, raise your hand if you've answered yes to either of these questions. And for those of you over here, I'll read them. How many of you have tapped a friend or a close colleague to assist with a work assignment and or project? Raise your hand. Okay, great. And how many of you have actively sought out someone to guide you with your career options? Raise your hand. Yeah. So what you've had in essence is a mentor, somebody who's, and this isn't the only definition, and we'll go into what a mentor is. Many people have mentors, but I have a question that's not on the slide. How many of you who have had a mentor had one of the opposite gender? Raise your hand. Okay. How about the opposite race? Okay. How about the opposite nationality? Not opposite, a different nationality, a different race. I guess there's not an opposite, is there? Good catch. I never throw in the race question, but I felt like throwing it in now, so I will delete that from the notes. So what we know is that, well, I'll share the results of why I'm asking particularly about gender. But one question I want to ask is, how many of you had a mentor who was quite senior or who had influence in your organization? Raise your hand. Great. Make note of that one. We'll come back to it. I'll explain when we go through the next questions. So we know that mentoring works. It can reduce stress. It can increase job satisfaction. It can improve performance and increase exposure within the organization. But it may lead to mixed results. So if you have the Slido, we're going to do a poll. I want you to answer this question, yes or no, or not sure, are women doing the right things to advance? And we're going to do this live. So if you have your phone, if there's only one of you doing it, there's only going to be one answer. I'll let you, if you need to download, we'll give you a second because there are going to be more questions. Oh, wow, not sure. Any yeses? Oh, okay, I'll wait. I won't jump to any conclusions. We'll let it go just a moment while people are adding it in. Huh, yes and not sure are in a tie. Okay, no. I'll wait. Okay, so the answer is yes. Women are doing the right things to advance. There's reasons why this is showing up as not sure. And we'll go to the next slide, and I'll explain. So we know from our research, when looking at these 10,000 MBAs, we asked men and women across globally, what are the tactics that help you advance, and what are the tactics do you believe are helpful? And This will be a poll question that will come up. I'm going to go through each one individually to explain it. And what I want you to do when we get to the poll is look, as I explain each of these, of the 9 tactics I share, what 3 do you think are the top tactics? And think about, what do you think, are they the same for men and women? And of all the tactics, what do you think men really help men advance? And what tactics do you think helped women advance? So first one, seek advice from coworkers, family, and others when needed about how to advance your career. So seeking advice. The other one is getting trained through experience, asking for a variety of work assignments to build skills and experience. Get formal training, lots of excellent workshops like this one. Make your achievements visible. Get credit for your work. Gain access to power by getting yourself introduced to people with influence. Blur work-life boundaries. What this means is work longer hours and make it visible that you're working longer hours. Make sure your boss knows you'll work long hours and weekends. Plan your career 2 to 3 years out and scan for opportunities outside the company. And finally, scan for opportunities inside the company. So of these 9 tactics, I want to first ask you for men, not only men and women reply, but I want you to think about what were the tactics that worked best for men. And there are more here, so when you do it on the poll, there's like flexible option, working flexibly is on there. Can we go back quickly to the slide just so that they can see? So if you look at this, look at what do you think really benefited them? I'm going to give you a hint. They're not all the same for men and women, the tactics that really applied. Okay. So does anybody want to guess? Pick 3. So what will happen is when you do it on Slido, you'll see the full list of them, and the top 3 will always show. So make achievements visible, that worked for men. Work long hours, gain access to power, get trained through experience, get formal. Yeah, so the top 2 so far appear to be make achievements visible and work long hours. Okay. And gain access to power. So let's go. You got 2 of them, 2 right out of the 3. What worked for men? Working long hours, gaining access to power, and scanning for opportunities outside the company, not inside the company. So kind of networking and making connections for your long-term planning. This translated well for men advancing. Now I have a question for you. I'm going to go to the next one. I just want to make sure. Again, we're going to do the same. I want to make sure I don't go too fast because I don't want to reveal. I want you to think about, what do you think helped women? What were the tactics that women did? So on Slido, go to the top 3 that you think helped women advance. So start voting. And they're not, the whole list on the screen is not the full list here. Okay, get trained through experience. Oh, it's changed. Seek advice from others. Get trained through experience. Make achievements visible. Seek advice, get trained. Okay, we're just going to let it go just a moment. I'll grab a sip of water. Okay. Only one of these is right, of the top 3. So guess which one? We're going to reveal. Only 2 worked that translated into advancement for women, and only 1 was identical for men. Make achievements visible. It was interesting. Did you notice in the poll before for men, this was one of the top ones, make achievements visible. I think it was the top one. For men, it's not necessary. And we'll go into that, why that is the case. But gain access to power by getting yourself introduced to people with influence. So 1 worked for all of them, and that was gaining access to power, people with influence. This is what a sponsor is somebody who's very senior. A sponsor is somebody who's in a place of power or massive influence in the organization that can affect decision-making. And men and women, this translates, so of all the tactics, this was the top one. Interesting, when we look at this, we found out one of the largest biases that we see in the workplace when we do unconscious bias training is that women must prove performance. And anytime you have a manager or somebody saying, well, she's not quite ready, that should be a cue for you that this could be bias that's happening. Development is for both genders. We're not saying that one gender needs more development than the other, but women are being overdeveloped and over-mentored. And so what they really need are sponsors, and I'll go into that. Now, what we found out, if women must show proven performance, oops, I'm too close. If women must show proven performance, men are promoted based on potential. And so what that means is that we're more likely to see the potential in men than in women. And it is something that, I think it's easier to demonstrate in a story. There was a CEO we were working with, and he had, he brought in 3 CVs, and he had a plant manager role that was up, and he brought in 3 female CVs to the meeting. And when he presented during the talent discussions and to the leadership team, these 3 women, they very methodically went through and said, very rationally, this, she's not quite ready. She has this and this, but I think she needs this experience. And I think, I think she needs more years as a manager. And they were there was a higher standard for the women. The CEO suspected that something was amiss. And so he went back. Not right away, but a little bit later, came back with 3 more CVs. And again, they went through, there were 3 women, and they went through it all, and very rational reasons. Well, she needs more of this, and she doesn't have this, and maybe she's not ready. And the CEO said, true story, okay, you just fired yourselves. Because 3 of you, these are your CVs, and I have just removed the names. I have kept the experience when you became plant manager. And he brought home the point very alive with these leaders that unconscious bias is not because we're going in and thinking, I'm going to be biased and pick somebody like me and do this. No, it's unconscious for a reason. It's how we deem what the best talent is. So what we encourage, it doesn't matter if you're a leader or not, we encourage people to look beyond what they deem as the best talent and also challenge, when I'm saying she needs more experience, what am I really saying? For women, making your achievements visible for the women in the room, that is hands down a top one that you want to pay attention to. For men, I'm sorry, you have to work long hours. It's unfair for men. The bias is going in the opposite direction. And so for men, being aware, you think, well, why is it that I have to do this? You're doing what's being rewarded oftentimes, often unconsciously. And in Germany, we were working with a group of leaders, in the Netherlands, and we gave them requests for flexibility to the group. And we said, okay, here's same request. And we had the group divided into 6 tables. The first 3 got a request from a woman. The other 3 got from a man, identical requests. 75% that had the man, they completely denied, said no way would we give him that flexibility request, but they gave the woman. And we brought him back to the room. We said, okay, you had the same request. Gender was the only difference. And they were really shocked to see that bias comes in quite alive and well. Okay. So we know that mentoring is necessary, but it's insufficient for advancement. In our study, when we looked at these MBA graduates, we found out that women actually have more mentors than men. But when we looked at the men and we looked at their mentors, men were calling them mentors. They were actually sponsors. And they were levels higher than the female mentors, and they had much more influence. And men, by and large, were making $9,000 more per year based on the level of their mentor. So they were financially even benefiting more by having that person in the room. And so Gordon Nixon, the former president and CEO of RBC, I think he summed it up really well. People tend to incorrectly use the words mentor and sponsor interchangeably. We've all had mentors who have offered advice, but sponsors are the people inside our company who have helped us get to senior levels. Sponsors are what you really need to succeed. I would add one thing to that. It's not an either or, it's and. And I'll go to explain what that means. The definition that I think is the easiest, and I like it very practical and simple, is that mentors talk with you, sponsors talk about you. The difference between a mentor and a coach, the coaches I've had, and I've been trained as a coach as well, is that a coach will rarely come in and give you advice. If they're only in very urgent matters might they guide you in a more direct way, fitting the situation. A coach will almost always ask you questions. A coach worth, really being a great coach is they're going to go on a journey with you, a discovery. It's not to say that a mentor will not ask you questions, of course, and a sponsor too, but a mentor is going to talk with you about it, is going to offer advice and be more of development. And the bottom line, mentoring is about development, sponsoring is about advancement. So when people come to me and they say, well, yeah, I've had all these mentors, I always inquire about the level, the person's influence. Also, how well did they know? In our study, we found out that the men who had these quote-unquote mentors were sponsors. Those sponsors were very senior, and the relationship was a much more targeted. The advice was given at a much higher level. And so I want to ask questions, but I know we'll come to that at the end, but I want to hear your questions about this. So when I want to ask you, actually, I'm going to ask this question. So do you have a piece of paper in front of you? We're not going to use Slido on this one. If you have a piece of paper in front of you, I want you to answer these 3 questions. It doesn't matter what level you are. It doesn't matter. It could be, so who advocated for you? Now, this is a sponsorship question. Who sponsored you? And if you go back, I just want to quickly go back. Sponsor, the person standing up in a boardroom with the doors closed and the employee, the person they're sponsoring, is not in the room. This is the essence of what a sponsor is. It is the one at the decision-making table who has influence, who's throwing your name on the desk to say, hey, I think she or he is ready for this next project, this next promotion, this next visible assignment. And so when you go to this question, write down and make a mental note if you don't have a pen or if you have a sandwich and a drink in your hand. Who advocated for you? Who have you advocated for in the past? Again, not mentoring. And who are you advocating for now? And just write it down briefly. Okay. So you can also do this at home if you don't feel like writing down now. The reason why we ask this is to think about who is developing who. And what we found, I'll tell another story. Many of you probably know Kimberly-Clark, the company. So Kimberly-Clark, they make, I think, Huggies and feminine care products. So the CEO of Kimberly-Clark is Tom Falk, and Kimberly-Clark won the Catalyst Award. It's very difficult to win, takes 500 hours of review, 1-year process, and they won the award. But what happened, the CEO stood in front of a group of leaders like this, and he had a whiteboard behind him. And he said to the group, I want you to go up and write down who advocated for you, and had them go up and write down the name. And they went and sat down, and he looked, and all the names were up there. And he looked to the audience, and 80% of the 100 leaders in the room were men, and 80% of the names on the board of those helping each other were men. So what he noticed is he looked to the audience, looked at the names, and he said, we have a problem. He said, 80% of you are men, and 80% of you are helping each other, and women were helping women. And he said, here's my problem. 80% of our consumer base are women, yet we have the opposite in our decision making. And I can tell by this list that we're promoting those like us. And he said, so he made it very clear. He said, you know, I want you to go back and not just gender, go back and pick somebody from another race, pick somebody from another age, pick somebody from another gender too. Different nationality. And I want you to start disrupting this default that we have in our organization where we're picking those like us. And so they went forward. In 4 years' time, they advanced women from up to the VP director level from 19% to 44%. The basis of it, they didn't launch a formal sponsorship program. They just asked to sponsor others different from you and be more inclusive of who you're advocating for. So we were speaking with the economist, and this whole discussion of causation, correlation came up. And the economist asked us, well, show us, we see that it financially makes sense for companies, but we want to talk with a company that actually can demonstrate that they've done this and they did it. So we went to Kimberly-Clark in London, and north of London. And so we went there and we said, okay, you want to be quoted in The Economist? You've won the Catalyst Award. You doubled your women into VP director level. What was the outcome? And I have a quote. They said, there can be no coincidence that at the time we doubled our women into these senior level roles, we have doubled our profits. So take what you want from that in terms of causation. And so I think we all do it. Years ago, I always share this story because I feel like I can't be let off the hook. But years ago, I had to hire somebody in my team. And I hired her, and at the time, the previous head of Europe, she called me in, and she's like, hey, did you see who you hired? She didn't point out to me anything. She just asked me one question. And I said, yeah, she's great, she's easygoing, and she was very qualified. She said, I want you to go back and look again at who you hired. So I looked, and I realized that it took me, I'm embarrassed to say, more than a few minutes to see it, because I was a bit defensive. I was like, oh. And I went and I looked, and I realized that I hired mini-me. I hired somebody who was the new, improved, taller, thinner, blonder version. And the most embarrassing part of the story, I wish I were exaggerating, she had the first same name, Allyson. So not only, and I'm in this space. So it is something we all do. If we had women all at the top of the house in the upper echelons, we'd be doing the same thing. So when we talk about sponsorship and advocating for others, we are not talking about giving anybody a hand up or being nice to them or putting them in a role that they're not deserving. That actually does a disservice. This is about looking across and broader for talent in a broader way, because the talent is out there. 60% in Europe of women graduating from the university are, they are women graduating from the university. So we know the talent is there. If you're in an industry that, such a space where you really have limited talent, you have to get this all the more right because you are competing for talent. And not to be provocative, but there are not enough white men to go around. You need more talent to be competitive, and it's to be innovative. The number one way you are going to innovate is through the talent. And yeah, I feel like I'm preaching and teaching right now. I want to get to the questions. That's the part I don't like. So sponsorship, it's a triple win. We discovered that not only does it benefit the individual being sponsored, it actually directly is tied to advancement. It also benefits the sponsor, the leader who is advocating. Sponsorship has always been around. This is nothing new. We just have a nice name for it. Sponsorship is good leadership, and sponsorship is how power is passed. And so looking at sponsorship, it benefits the organization. You do not lose as much talent. You have more engaged leaders. And if that's not enough, leaders who sponsor financially make $25,000 more than leaders who do not advocate for those who are different. So that's not enough. So if you want to be, and we'll have Q&A, I know we still have loads of time, and my hope is to give you back some time too, so you can eat more, but and connect with each other. But tips for attracting a sponsor: make yourself and your work visible. We heard about that. Use strategies for making your accomplishments known. Take risks. You don't need to satisfy all criteria. There is research, it's not Catalyst research, that shows women often underestimate what they can do. They will say, I need to have all the boxes ticked. There is other research showing that men overestimate what they can do by 30%. So we ask that we kind of come in the middle and we look at, let's challenge what we can do. So if you're trying to find a sponsor, absolutely, you don't need to have all criteria. One executive, this is public, so I can share the company, from BP. She's very senior at BP, and she was up for a role. And her sponsor, a sponsor is the one who is out there advocating. The sponsor, she had a discussion, and he said, I really want to know, what are you interested, where do you want to go in the company? And there was an opportunity that he thought she would be great at. And she said to him, I don't know, this is like a step up, too high. And he went, stop. He said, do you have 70% of what you can do here? And she said, yeah. He said, that's enough. And she ended up going very high in the organization, very successful at BP. But she contributes to that straight feedback from a sponsor. And then ask for what you want. Most people aren't mind readers, and the bias will come in and they'll make assumptions for you. So being clear on what you want. I have to say, for finding a sponsor, whenever we do like masterclass sessions with companies, I always ask that we put the sponsors in one room and the sponsees in another, because there's often different questions but similar. And one thing I always say to the sponsees, those who want to have a sponsor, is what I said before, that's not a hand up. You must be a top performer to have a sponsor. And so I also say it's not who you know, it's who knows you, which goes into that increasing the visibility. And that can be awkward and that can be tough to do, but that's something that really played well. Especially we saw it for the gender, for women, but I think it's also being aware that people need to know who you are. Tips for being a sponsor. My favorite, if you're wanting to sponsor and you forget everything I talked about, challenge your assumptions. Challenge what talent looks like, challenge what you think he or she wants in a role, and ask questions. Jim Turley, former CEO of EY, called this, not asking questions, the silent problem. And what it is and how you ask questions can be important, such as, you really don't want that job in India, do you? Framing a question like that can be really make somebody put them off, versus saying, you know, I think you're ready for that job in India. I think you're ready, and this is you should go for it. How you phrase the question is as important as how that you ask the question. And what we see is often, especially when women come back and from maternity leave, there can be assumptions about, oh, you know, there can be positive intent involved. You know what? I'm not going to give her that project because she's coming back. But what you're doing is actually clipping her wings. And we say, ask, does she want this role? I have one of my colleagues in Germany. She had a speaking engagement. I noticed it was 4 weeks after she gave birth. And I was like, okay, so who's going to do the speaking engagement? My assumption was she was going on maternity leave. And she was like, are you crazy? I'm coming back like 3 weeks. I was like, what? And I had my assumption. It was intent. I wanted her to feel comfortable as long as she wanted to be out. Oh, she had her mom there. We work all over Europe, and she, you know, set it up. And it was such an aha for me of not making assumptions about how somebody can get things done. Excuse me. Provide strategic guidance. I gave an example about the 70%. This is different than development. The number one hiccup where things go wrong with sponsorship programs, formal or informal, is that the sponsor goes into it unconsciously acting like a mentor. And the reality is most of your advocating is not going to be with the person near you. It's going to be, the sponsoring will happen when they're not there, where you say, hey, and they might be there. Maybe you're introducing them to your network and increasing their visibility. And it's also giving feedback. There will be times where you'll say, you know, I don't know if you're aware you're doing this, but stop. You know, look at it. Be conscious of it. That's also part of it as well. And give feedback. Women in the STEM industry do not get feedback. They do not get the same level of feedback. So there is a CEO of the Fortune 500 who realized that the women in her tech company were not giving feedback. So what she ended up doing is she ended up bringing the top 50 women and set up meetings with the manager of every one of those women and sat down and gave constructive feedback, but had the manager there to hear her give the feedback, to know what it looked like. There's a lot of fear in giving women feedback for some reason, and that is one that we say, especially in the STEM industry, be very conscious of the feedback, that you are equally giving feedback, because it can really help. And I think I've mentioned most of those. Sponsorship. If you're a sponsor and you have a sponsee, or if you're a sponsee and you have a sponsor, they usually meet quarterly, and they usually set up, and the sponsee brings the CV, shares a little bit about her, him, about what they're interested in, but you do not need to have a sponsor in the same division. There are companies that actually intentionally, in a formal sponsorship program, bring sponsors from other regions and other departments to sponsor others. So it doesn't mean that you have to know them, but you do need to get to know them. Okay. Ingredients to make it work. I won't spend too much time. It's pretty self-explanatory. Be open, direct communication, constructive, have a commitment to it, honest feedback, and trust. So I will open up to questions. I don't know if you have any. I suddenly have a cold. Does anybody in the room have questions before we pull it up on Slido? Or comments? Or did anything jiggle your jello? It's a very technical term. Great. Are there any? Yeah. Oh, I was just asking. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be on Slido. You can just ask or yell it out.
I think you did too good of a job.
Maybe I talk too much. Yes.
So, yeah, my name is Anthony. My name is Anthony Segranis. I'm with NASA, but this is a personal question.
Sure.
To what extent do you also look at socioeconomic status
Oh.
as a trigger for advancement? And then, second, related, in addition to how people appear on the outwardly, is there any work on the advancement of people who are non-neurotypical?
Non-what?
Non-neurotypical.
Yeah, it's a great question. I wouldn't tie it specifically to our research. We do a lot on what it means to feel like the other, but the socioeconomic status is a real one. When you look, for example, we do a lot of work in the UK, and in the UK, when you see class, and you see class is definitely one of the factors that plays in. I would accent. And so you have that as well. And I'm going to speak, in this example, I'll use the UK, but we can talk about accent in Romania versus an accent in Germany. We could compare across. But with the UK, if you're from the Midlands in the UK and you have a Brahmi accent and you try to work in London, it is really difficult. It's not impossible, but that is one of the biggest biases. Name. If you have a name that you cannot pronounce, which many people do, that is actually a bias that works against you as well. And then, I don't want to depress, but I mean, these are unconscious biases. And gender, absolutely. But socioeconomic status, it's not in our research specifically. What is feeling like another, being different. And we all can feel different, but there are some people that feel different 24/7. And that can really factor in. Great. So if you have questions, I'll stay around because I'm going to catch lunch if there's something left. But otherwise, thank you for having me, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Allyson. I need to apologize our moderator, Mary Snitch. She had to move already on to her next meeting. Thanks a lot to your very inspiring and interesting thoughts. This closes actually this official part of this lunch. Stay here as long as you still like.